Hello, welcome to our presentation on Microsoft Power BI Pro. For those that are new to Endeavour, we've been around for 30 years now, have over 600 clients across Canada and the US and parts of Europe. 3 lines of business include advisory services, implementation and upgrades, and ongoing support. Core focus is Microsoft Dynamics business applications, including GP, Business Central, and NAV ERP systems, Dynamics 365 CRM, as well as the cloud products from Office 365 and Azure. Power BI falls in with the cloud products and connects very nicely into each of the ERP and CRM systems. As I mentioned, core to our business is the business applications platforms, Dynamics GP and Business Central, and surrounding those with a cloud of products, payroll and HR products in the cloud, Office 365, a variety of third-party add-on applications that work with both Dynamics GP and Business Central, and cloud-based reporting, Power BI included, as well as budgeting and other systems and tools. Dynamics 365 CRM is cloud-based and integrates very well with Dynamics GP and Business Central. And we have a variety of online cloud hosting options and backup options for those that are on-premise and want to complement their systems with those tool sets. So, Microsoft Power BI. Why did Microsoft create Power BI and what is its purpose? The why is around storytelling. It's creating unique dashboards, instant reports, ability to allow end users to have rich data at their fingertips so they can make better informed data-based decisions. How does it happen? Through dashboards, designing dashboards, easy to deployment across organizations, and of course secured through the Microsoft security provisions related to Office 365, Azure Active Directory, and a variety of other role-based security as you want to set up. There are a large number of Power BI examples, free dashboards that you can see online through the Power BI site or access, can be implemented into Dynamics 365 for viewing and evaluation. And then looking at Power BI Pro to allow users to create their own, modify their own, and share and receive shared dashboards at a company or organizational level, or down to a team-based level. Again, pulling back to where we started, dashboards are very strong for visual, enhanced decision-making for users, making it easy for them to have information at their fingertips and telling a good story. As you can see on the right, a good KPI, key performance indicator, has a unique measure, has business context, so it's telling that story. Green is good, red is bad, different dials and illustrations to help users understand a rich set of contextual data. And of course, your data needs to be trusted. So building your dashboards in a fashion that conveys that trust, and having behind the scenes working with a company such as Endeavour to make sure that you're exposing and connecting to the right data within your ERP, CRM, or a variety of other systems. So with that said, I would like to introduce Laura. Laura, I'm going to make you presenter. If you can introduce yourself and accept presenter privileges as I send them over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Scott. I'm Laura Muse, and I'm a technical consultant here at Endeavour Solutions. I work on our development team with a focus on data management, integrations, and analysis. And this demo will be covering building dataset models and reports within the Power BI desktop, as well as publishing and sharing the reports. So first, I just want to run through the data source that we're going to be using. And in this case, I just created 2 views, and the underlying data is being pulled from the Fabricam test company from Great Plains. So our 2 views basically is just showing some customer details, as well as some sales details that are summarized for a given year for the given customers. So we're going to be opening up the Power BI desktop, And we're going to be using this instead of the web application because this way we can build out our reports and then we can save it to a PBIX file. And we can also change our organization. If you go up to the right-hand corner, you'll notice that right now I'm signed in as my Endeavor Solutions organization. But if I later wanted to publish this to a different organization, then I could change who I'm signed into and publish it to that location. So it's good to have the Power BI desktop because you have a lot of power to be able to share stuff and send it to different locations. So if we look on the left-hand side, there's 3 different tabs that we've got. Right now we're in the report section. There's also data as well as modeling. So right now the report section is blank, but we're going to work on that. But first we need to pull our data in. So we have our SQL data source. And if you come up to the top ribbon, you can see that there's a section for data. I can see that there is SQL Server already available, but if it's not in these few buttons up here, I can click Get Data, and this will show me a few more options. So I can go down to More, so it's going to pull up all possible data sources, and you can see that it's quite a large list. And even if there's something here, if you have a data source that you're not seeing on this list, you can come down to the blank query and you can write a query from scratch to bring your data in. So it's very versatile. But we have our SQL data source. So I'm going to go up to the text box and I'm just going to type in SQL and it'll filter down all the data sources. So I'll find my SQL Server database and I'll click Connect. So I'll come over to here, I'll enter the server. I've just got it on a localhost one. The database name that has our views. And then you'll notice right below that is the data connectivity mode. So there's 2 different options that we have. We can import, which is going to copy our data into the Power BI desktop, which is going to cache everything in memory, which means we're going to get huge performance boosts. But it also means that we're going to have a restriction of 1 gigabyte of data. So you're going to have to kind of weigh that out and see what works best for you. The other option is direct query. And this means that it's going to save if you select the direct query, then that's going to save the schema for your data source, and then it's going to go out and query the database and fetch the data. So this one you're going to have slower performance. However, it's good if you have data that's being refreshed very frequently because you're always going to have up-to-date data. So in this case where I have a smaller data set and it's just on a test company and I know it's not updating frequently, I'm just going to use the import and I'll select OK. So from here, it's going to show all the database elements within the database that I've selected. So I want to select our 2 views. So I'm going to go to the customer one and the sales one. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, it's going to show a preview of the data in that view. And it also has these refresh buttons. So if I create the view after I've gone into this navigation screen, I can click on the refresh and it will show an updated list of all of our database elements. Similarly over here, if the view has changed recently, I can hit the refresh button and our preview will update. So now there's 2 buttons at the bottom. We can either transform the data or we can load it. At this time, I'm just going to load it as is. And then we'll go into the Power Query Editor, which is where the Transform Data button goes at a later point. So we'll load our data, and this will just take a few moments. So once this finishes loading, we're going to go over to the Modeling tab. And once we're over there, what we're going to see is we're going to see the 2 data sources, but also Power BI in the background. It's going to try to predict what the relationship is between them. So we'll see how accurate it is and to see if there's any changes that we need to make. Okay, so now that we have that loaded, we're going to come back to this Modeling tab. And we'll now see that we've got our 2 data sources. We can drag them around the screen wherever we want, and we can see that it's already predicted the relationship between our 2 data sources. So we can see from the highlighted fields that it's suggesting that we use customer number as our key field, which is what we do want to use. So if we double click on this, we can get a few more details on this relationship that it's built out. So we can see here, it's highlighted a key field, so that all looks good. And then we also have the cardinality down here. So right now it's saying that it's a many-to-one relationship. And that's exactly what we want because in the sales table, we're going to have multiple customers showing up versus in the customer table, we should only ever see a customer showing up once. And over here, we've got a cross-filter direction. Right now it's set to single, and we can see through the relationship bar, we've got an arrow pointing in a specific direction. So that means if we make changes to the customer table, it's going to filter down onto the sales table, but any changes on the sales table is not going to filter to the customer when we're building our report. So I actually want to change this because I want to make it bidirectional. So I'm going to select both, and then I'll click OK. So now that that has updated, I'm going to come in to transform the data. And this is going to be the same step as when we saw that button on that earlier screen to transform the data. So it's going to open the Power Query Editor. And once this opens up, we'll see that on the left-hand side, we'll have all of our data sources. So we see on the left-hand side, we've got our customer data source as well as our sales data source. And we can click, and that will change what we see. So in the middle, we're getting a preview of the data, and on the right-hand side, it's showing the applied steps. So these are any changes that we've put in place. We can also see that for each of the columns, it shows the data type that it's predicting it should be at the top. So we see that the year is the whole number, and then all the other fields to the right are decimal numbers. But for my sales year-over-year change, that's actually a percentage value, and I want to have it show that way. So what I'll do is I'll right-click on this column. And I'll come down to Change Type, and I'll select Percentage. And this is just going to change the way that it looks visually. So now we see it's represented as 0%. So that looks a bit better. And we can also see in our applied steps, we now have this Change Type value. If you want to see what change that made, you can click on the line above it. So we can go to Navigation, and we can see that previously it was just a 0. And also if you decide that you want to reverse a change that you've made, you can click on the red X that will show up right next to the applied step. So now that we've got this in place, we're good to go. And we're not going to be covering the M language today, but I just want to show you an example of it. So if you come into Advanced Editor, it's going to show you the M script that is generated for all those manual steps that you've done. So if you're trying to learn M, this is a great way to do it because it's going to show you based on what you've already done. So I'm not going to make any changes there because we've already done all of our changes. So at this point, I'm just going to click on Close and Apply. And this will bring us back to our Power BI desktop. So now we have our data sets. It's just going to take a moment to refresh. So now that that has refreshed, we've now created our data source. We've loaded it into Power BI. We've massaged our data, and now we're ready to build our reports. So now we're going back to our Report tab, where we can see we've got this blank white canvas to work with. And on the right-hand side, we can see that there's 3 different panel options. So if we look at filters, that's going to be data filters that we can add to either this specific page or to multiple pages. And you'll see at the bottom here, right now it says page 1, but if I hit the plus button, then we can add additional pages. So if you have multiple reports that you want to create, you can do it that way. We also have the visualization. And this panel is going to show all of our visuals, where it shows all the ones out of the box, and you can also click on the 3 dots if you want to import a custom visual. Next, we've got our fields. And this is going to show our data sources, which we can then expand on to show all of the fields within the data sources. So now we're ready to start building our report. So at this point, you can either just start clicking on visualizations, or you can just start clicking on the fields, and it's going to try to predict what you want to see. So I'm going to start with an area chart. And for the fields, we can either just click on them, and it'll predict where to put it, or we can drag and drop it. So if we want sales in our value, we can drag it and put it there. So for this one, I'm going to want sales of last year and the year, but I don't want it to look this way. I actually want year in a different section. So I'm going to click on it, drag it up to the axis, and I'll just drop it there. So now we can see that we've got our data coming across for our time spans. So we've got from 2014 to 2018. Now for our visuals, we can readjust the size by clicking on the dark gray edges that will be on the corners and on the sides and the top and bottom. So now we've got our first visual here, but there's a few things that I'm not a huge fan of. Some of the text, it could be a bit friendlier. So if we come back to our visualizations pane, there's a paintbrush over here, which we can use to format it. So I'm going to come into here, and I'm actually going to remove the title that we have on the y-axis. So I'll expand out the y-axis section, and then it has a whole bunch of different options that you can tweak for the y-axis, but I'm just going to look at the title. So I'm going to turn that off, and you'll see the visual updates right away. And I'm also going to go to the main title, because while I do want a title, I don't like the one that it has right now. So I'm going to give it something a bit more friendly that's easier to interpret. So we'll say sales and previous year's sales. And you'll see that the visual will update with that. So now I'm going to add another visual. And for this one, I'm going to want a line chart. So I'm going to click on the line chart. And then I'll click on year and sales diff. Both of these will go into the value section, but again, I want the year to be on the axis because I'm trying to create a consistency between the two visuals that I've added to this report. So that looks good, but formatting-wise, I'm going to want to add consistency there as well. So in the y-axis, I'm just going to remove that title again. Then I'm going to go into the title, and I'm going to change that as well. I still want the title to be there, but I want it to be something else. So now that that's updated, I'm happy with the formatting, but let's look at the analytics. So if we click on the visual so that we get the visualization panel to update again, we can come over to this magnifying glass, and that will be our analytics. Over here, there's going to be a few different lines that you can add onto the visual. And I'm going to want a trend line because I'm trying to see how our data has changed over time. So I'll click trend line, and then I'll just click the add button. And this will just add one in. And there's going to be a few different formatting options, which we can see down here, such as the style and the color. But I'm just going to leave it exactly as it is. Now, if we look at our data so far, we can see that we've got a downward trend happening in our data. But also if we look on our first visual, we can see that 2018 had a significant drop in sales. In this situation, that's because in 2018, we only have data for January, whereas all the other years, we have full year of data. So what we want to do is we're going to add a filter in to remove 2018 from this data set. So I'm going to come over to our year, and I'll drag and drop it into our filter. And we're going to say we only want to show it where it's less than 2018, and then we'll apply the filter. Now that this has applied, our visuals have updated, and we can now see that we have a positive trend happening. And that's because we have full years of data, so now we have a more accurate picture in our trend visual on the bottom. So I'm just going to close the filters panel just so that we have a bit more space on our report. And I'm going to move these to the right-hand side. So to move it, you just click on it and move the visual over. You're going to see some red lines when it thinks you should drop it in a certain spot. So in this case, I've reached the bottom edge and the right-hand side edge. So it's recommending that I drop it in that location. And I'll do the same thing with the top one, where again, I'll see the red lines, and all three lines shows me that I'm completely lined up so that I'm right on top of the previous visual. So that's pretty good. We've got some visuals about the sales, but now I want to see more information about the customers. So I'm going to come over, and I want to bring in the customer name as well as the sales difference. That way we can tie our data sets together and see what's happening for the specific customers. So I'm going to expand this visual out because we have a lot of customers. So I'm going to want to vertically take up as much space as possible. Okay, now that we can see that data set, one thing that I'm not a huge fan of is that we're seeing custom name and sales diff because those were the names of the fields from our data source. But that's not very friendly, and if you're not familiar with the data source, you might not know what that's referencing. So I'm going to come over into our visualization section, and I'm going to double click on one of the fields, and I'm going to rename it. So for cust name, I'm going to replace this with customer name. And I'll hit enter, and this will update our visual. I'll then do the same thing for the sales diff. So this will be our sales difference. So that's a bit better. And we can also see that it's currently sorting the data. Right now it's sorted by customer name, but I actually want to see it by sales difference because I'm going to want to see the customers at the top that have had the biggest gains in sales over time. So I can click on that column and it's going to resort all of the data that we have. So we can now see the top customer up here who has had the biggest gains. But again, we're looking at numbers, and that's not very easy to read. So I want a way to easily picture where each customer is at. So to do that, I'm going to come back over to our sales difference, and I'm going to right-click on it, and we're going to do some conditional formatting. So I'm going to add in some data bars. So I'm going to actually leave the default values as is, because I want our minimum and maximum values to be our lowest and highest values. And the positive bar is going to be a dark blue, whereas the negative bar will be a light blue. So I'll just hit OK, and we'll now see that we have some bars showing up on top of the numbers. And this will help us with understanding where the customers are at. So we can see that Plaza One, there's actually quite a bit of a difference between their gains and Astor Suites. So we can derive a lot of information out of this graph already. So I'm just going to resize this. And now that I'm happy with where that is, we can now add another visual in for a map. And this will allow us to see where our customers are located. So first, I'm just going to resize this so that it locks in with all the other visuals that we have. So again, I'm just looking for when the red line shows up, because that tells me it's in line with the other stuff that we have. So now I'll click on the map so that it's highlighted in the visualization section again. And first, I'm going to add in country. So from this, we can now see the countries of all of our customers once the map refreshes. So this is great, but it doesn't really tell me how many customers we have in each of these regions. I can see that there is some in North America, and if I just click and drag, I can see that we also had some in Australia. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to add our customer number, and I'm going to drag it and drop it onto the size. And what this is going to do is it's going to do a count of the customers in the given regions and then show a bubble size that corresponds with that. I'm also just going to change this to be a distinct count instead of the regular count. And you might notice that right now United States has two bubbles over it. And the reason it has that is because in our data source, we have reference to a country being USA and we have reference to the country being the United States. So this is something that you could either change in your data source by altering your view, or you could do it when you did your modeling updates in the Power Query Editor. So from here, maybe I want more granular data. So I'm going to take the state and I'm going to add that into the location. And you can go a lot more granular into the exact address, but I'm pretty happy at this point because I get a general idea of where things are. So I can see that North America is of importance. So I'm going to scroll, which is going to let us zoom. And we can see that a lot of the customers are located mostly within the middle of the United States, and some are spread out across Canada, and then also on the west coast of the States. So I'm pretty happy with that. So at this point, I'll just do some formatting things. I feel like as a map, it doesn't need a title, so I'm just going to turn that off. And then we can also change the style of the map. So right now it's kind of got this blue hue, and it's called road, but I'm going to change it to the grayscale because I want the blue to really pop. So now that we have that, I'm going to add a filter onto our report because maybe I want to change it to see for specific years what's happening. So I'm going to click on Slicer, and then I'll select the year. So I'll move this into the corner, and I'll shrink it up a little bit. But now we have a slicer added in, so we can look at specific years. For example, if I drag this to look at the first 2 years, all of our visuals are going to update, and we're going to see our data only from 2014 to 2015. So I'll move this back up to 2017, and let's add a title onto this report. So to add a title, I'm going to come up into this insert section where we have a few different options, but I'm going to select text box. This will add a text box where we have some formatting options. So I'm going to change a few things because I'm going to want this to be like a title, so I want it to be quite large. And I'm going to want it bolded, and let's make it a blue color because that seems to be a main color that we have so far in this report. And I'll call it Sales Trends by Customer and Year. Since that wraps over, I'm just going to bring that down to a new line, and I'm just going to center this. So now we've got quite a few visuals onto our report, and we might be pretty happy with it at this point, but there is still a lot of white space. So maybe we want to add a background or an image or a color of some sort. So to do that, you're going to click anywhere in the page where there isn't a visual, and then you'll come over to the visualization panel. And then you'll click on our paintbrush, which is for formatting, and this will show options for the page itself. So we can come down to page background. And here we can either select an image or we can choose a color. So I'm just going to try to get it to line up with our map a little bit. So I'll go for gray color. And right now it's 100% transparency. So I'll move this down to 0 so that the gray shows through. And you might notice that it's only showing gray in a very small section. And that's because all of our visuals by default have a white background. So what we're going to want to do is click on the visuals and then change them in the formatting so that the background is turned off. So we're going to go through and we'll do that for each of the visuals, and you'll see that the gray will slowly show over all the background. And I'm actually going to leave it after I turn the background off for the map. So now that we have the background off on the right-hand side stuff, I'm actually going to leave the white background for our table that we have on the left-hand side. And I'm going to do this because I like the way it alternates between the white and the gray, and I think it helps show up the different customers. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with this report. I can interact with it. We saw with the year filter how we can change that around. We can also scroll in on the different regions. For example, Illinois has quite a big bubble. So if we click on that, then everything will filter down for specifically the Illinois region. So now we can see the customers that are in the Illinois region, as well as we can see the sales data. So we can see that 2017 hasn't been the greatest year. So maybe we want to focus more on our Illinois customers because we have so many there. And maybe we want to try to increase the sales that we have in that area. So I'll click on the map just so that we'll see all of the data again. And then we can start filtering in on specific customers. So I'll come over to our customers table, and I can click on the customer, and it will filter all the data down onto that one customer. So now we can see that they're in Minnesota, and we can see the sales data over the years. And maybe we want to compare the top 3 customers. So what you can do is you can hold down Control and then click on the next customers, and this will then update the graphics to show it for all 3. So now we can see, once we have our 3 customers highlighted, we can see that 2 of them are located in Minnesota and 1 of them is down below in Indiana. We can also look at our sales details, and we can see that 2017, the current sales dropped below last year's sales, so maybe we want to start looking at that as well. So there's a lot of potential within Power BI, and now that our report is ready, because at this point we've got all of our visuals in place, there's not much more space on the page, and I think we've got a good coverage of all the things that we want to report on. So we can come up here to this Publish button. And when we click this, it's going to publish it up to the web application. So it's going to ask you if you want to save your changes. So I'll hit Save, because this is going to generate that PBIX file that I was talking about. So once you have this, then you can share it to other people, share it to different servers, and then they can work from the same report that you've started on. So I'll just call this Demo, and we'll hit Save. So now after it saves, it's going to publish it up to the web. So we get to choose where we want to send it. So in this case, I'll select the PBI training just because this is an empty workspace that I've created. So we'll select that. So now we can see that it's been successful. It is now published up to Power BI. So I'll just exit out of that, and we can now go into the web application. So I'll just open up my browser, and I'm already into the PBI training workspace. And if you don't see this right away, so we'll go into the web application. We can see on the right-hand side that it's ready to go. I'll just exit out of that. And currently we're in the PBI training workspace, which is the one that we want to be in. But by default, it's going to open into My Workspace. So if you're looking for a specific one, you can click on Workspaces. It'll show all possible ones, and you can select the one that you want to go into. So now we can see on the left-hand side, it's going to show where our dashboards, reports, workbooks, data sets, where everything is located. So we can see that we've got our data set. We can click on that if we want to see a preview of the data, and we can see our reports. So we see that we have our demo one over here, so I'll just click on that. So once this loads, we'll be able to see a copy of our report that we just made. Okay, now that we can see our report in the web app, we can hit the Edit Report if we want to make any changes to it. And also on the right-hand side, we can share it. So if we click on that, it's going to create a new pop-up where we can enter an email address of someone who also has a Power BI Pro license, and they're within the organization. We can select the permissions that we want them to have, and we can click on Share. And then you can come over to the Access side, and it will show who has access to this report. So right now, it's only me. So we can cancel out of this. And at this point, we have our report on the Power BI web app, which means we can access it through the app as well. But at this point, maybe I want to create a dashboard, because maybe I don't want to be having all the filters around, and I don't want to have the extra buttons appearing. So if I want to create a dashboard of this exact report, I can say Pin a Live Page. And when I click on that, it's going to open up a screen for which dashboard I want to pin it to. I don't have any existing dashboards, so I'll click on New Dashboard, and I'll enter a name. So I'll just call it Sales Trends, and I'll say Pin Live. So now it's complete. I can click on Go to Dashboard. So now I can see the report, but I don't have any of the filters, and there's less buttons. It's literally just what was on the report. And similar to our report, it has a share button up here. So if you want to share the dashboard, then you can click up here, and it's going to look the exact same as it did over on the report side. There's also options to just add specific visuals. So we can delete this from our dashboard, and if we want, we can come back to our report and select a specific visual. So let's say that some people want to see all of the sales trend data and they want to see all the customer details, but maybe there's some people who all they want to see is the sales and the previous year's sales. So if you just want to see the sales and the previous year's sales, then you can come up here and click on this pin button, and that's going to pin the visual. After you click on that, similar to before, you can choose what dashboard, whether an existing or a new one, you want to save it to. So since we've already created the sales trends dashboard, I'm going to pin it to that one. So now I'll go back to the dashboard, And now we can see that if we're not interested in all the data on the report, we can choose specific visuals and bring them over here. And same as before, we can now share this with other users. So now you can build your dashboard based on what your report is. So we've created our SQL views, we've loaded our data set, massaged the data, we built our report, and then we published it into the web application. We turned it into a dashboard, and we learned how we could share both the report and the dashboard.
Thank you, Laura. Much appreciated. For those that have additional questions and or new to Endeavor, please feel free to reach out to Trish, James, or Steve on our team, and they're more than happy to help you move you along through the process and introduce you to Power BI, potentially assist with a demo or proof of concept, and ultimately integration into your systems. With that said, have a great day. Thanks very much, Laura.
Thanks.